outrage from the left. Shouters on the other cable channels immediately denounced Kavanaugh as a gang rapist. Virtually all the leading Democrats running for president demanded that Kavanaugh be impeached and removed from office. And then, almost immediately, the story fell apart. Sunday night, the newspaper was forced to make a devastating correction to the piece. In fact, the woman that Kavanaugh supposedly attacked didn't remember anything about the event. And just like so many previous stories about Brett Kavanaugh, the whole thing turned out to be a crock. So last night, Kellyanne Pogrebin sought refuge on MSNBC, in fact, on a show highly familiar with botched stories. The explanation? Don't blame us, blame our editors.
What happened with that omission that the Times later felt belonged in the piece?
Well, first of all, Lawrence, there was zero intent to mislead anybody about the details of the incident.
In your draft of the article, did it include those words that have since been added to the article?
It did.
It did. So somewhere in the editing process, those words were tracked.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened actually was that, we had her name, and the Times doesn't usually include the name of the victim. And so I think in this case, the editors felt like maybe it was probably better to remove it. And in removing her name, they removed the other reference to the fact that she didn't remember it.
And so in their removal of the name, they ended up removing
the whole
what follows.
Yes, and so I think it was just sort of an editing, done in the haste, in the editing process, as you know.
Well, actually, that story could be true. The New York Times is not what it used to be. It's perfectly believable that some half-asleep, politically inflamed editor at the paper would blow one of the most important stories of the year. It's not a very impressive news outlet anymore. But a missing line is not the only problem with this story. Watch the treatment the two authors received, of all places, on The View.
I understand that the woman didn't want her name out publicly. If not, why is her name in the book?
Her name is in the book because we think it's relevant information and we think it's accurate. And we know that her name was provided to members of the Senate and the FBI by a witness named Max Steyer, who is a good governance activist in Washington, who's a respected figure. And he had provided this name. The name is in documents. It's in a letter. Right? He did at one point, I understand, do work for Williams and Connolly.
Why wasn't that in the piece? Because that is, if we're talking about credibility.
Right. I understand it's relevant background. In this case, it was a very short mention, and we only talked in brief terms about what he's doing right now. So we didn't see all of that context to be necessary. But I understand why you're bringing it up, and I think it's fair.
Just a short mention. Of course, it's the critical claim in the story/book. Oh, we left out some context. Well, it turns out some people think it's relevant when a character-destroying smear comes from political activists rather than from, say, ordinary citizens. You ought to be able to know that when you're reading the piece. The Times disagrees, though. They don't think you have a right to that context. Of course, these are also the people who took the Trump dossier seriously and buried the context in that. And, in some ways, it's a shame that Kellyanne Pogrebin bungled their story so badly, because the book actually has some interesting revelations in it, assuming they're true. For example, they were the first reporters to get an on-the-record statement from Leland Keyser. That's the friend of Blasey Ford, who supposedly could corroborate her story of being assaulted, but in the end did not corroborate it. Why didn't she? Well, Keyser told the authors that she had, quote, no confidence in Blasey Ford's story. That's not something the left wants you to hear, so of course the authors downplayed that and buried it at the very end of the book. Really? Seems like the lead, but no. They downplayed it. They also downplayed another telling fact pattern, which is just how far the left was willing to go to destroy Kavanaugh last year. Molly Hemingway and Carrie Severino also wrote a book on the subject. It's called Justice on Trial. And they reported that Leland Keyser faced sustained pressure from the left to change her story, to lie, and support Blasey Ford's account. Kellyanne Pogrebin found out what exactly that pressure was. They got text messages in which Blasey Ford's allies discussed defaming Leland Keyser, who's a suburban mom outside D.C., as a drug addict. Keyser confirmed that this happened, as she told the two reporters, quote, I was told behind the scenes that certain things could be spread about me if I didn't comply. Now that's an interesting story, far more relevant than some unsupported gossip from a decades-old dorm party. It just happened last year. The problem with it, though, is that the story, the truth of it, makes the activist left look like ruthless fascists. Why? Because they kind of are. So the New York Times suppressed that. They didn't want you to know. And you should know that. Britt Hume is Fox's senior political analyst, and he joins us tonight. So, Britt, as a piece of journalism, how What do you assess the story?
This is a story that should never have gotten anywhere near print. I mean, remember now, we're talking here about a second-hand account from a witness that the authors did not speak to and who is not speaking. And he is said by friends to be saying this happened, right? So it isn't even a first-hand account. So right there, you got a huge strike against you if you're trying to get the story into print, at least in the old New York Times, right? And then on top of that, you have the fact that the woman herself is not talking, the alleged victim is not talking, and she has told friends that she didn't remember this. So I mean, I can only imagine what would have happened back in my nowspaper days if I went to an editor and said, "This is what I've got." I mean, I can just see him picking up the copy and throwing it across the room, and you couldn't get anywhere near. This is nowhere near publishable.